We all know that by the time Parliament approved the supplementary budget, everything had been made clear, and if that hadn't happened, then that supplementary budget wouldn't have been approved. So I believe by the time such a decision was taken, the ministry the ministers had convinced Ugandans that Uganda owns Uganda Airlines.
What went wrong? That's the question. What went wrong?
Well, I think it was about the documentation, presentation of documentation. That's why the minister had to withdraw.
The minister laid documents on the table of Parliament.
Yes, she
had
did.
to withdraw those documents and present new documents. Now, to convince Ugandans and say, no, we could walk into the registry in the morning, we had a different company with different shareholding, and then walk back into the same registry in the afternoon and come out with documents that say, no, actually this is the correct position. It takes a lot to convince Ugandans that actually, especially for a company as sensitive as Uganda Airlines, given its history, that actually someone was not simply sleeping on the job, but someone is actually trying to take Ugandans on a joyride.
Right, yeah. Of course, that's the impression that has been created. But as I said, the minister did withdraw those documents, and we realized that the actual documents are the ones that were filed that were filed in July 2018. Those were the correct documents, and it was just an error, and the minister was able to apologize. And we hope that we are in position to convince Ugandans that this was simply a mistake, a grave mistake, and we have taken responsibility for that mistake, and we are taking steps towards correcting everything.
How did the mistake happen?
Well,
Mr. Malay is itching to come in.
Yeah,
Mr. Malay, you're the technical person here. Yeah. I mean,
yes.
Mistakes on multi-million-dollar investments don't just happen.
I think perhaps to put matters correct, all government projects are structured, and all the documentation is handled through Attorney General's chambers, as you know, who advise on what to do in times like this. So, for this particular project and registration, the correct steps were taken with the correct advice to register the airline under the two ministries, Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Transport. As you know, at the time of incorporation, you do only a nominal shareholding.
Mm-hmm.
The intention had always been to register the company owned 50-50 between Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Transport. And this is what was done. So nominal shares were issued at the time of incorporation because the company had not yet been funded. So the rest of the shares were to be allotted later after the company had been funded. And as Ugandans would recall, the company was funded in July. So it was at that time, after funding, that the rest of the shares were allotted.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is the information that did not come out correctly at the time that this debate was happening.
You have two issues, Mr. Malaya, here. You have one is the nominal, the shareholding.
Yes.
Two, you have the people registered as the owners of the company.
Yes.
The registration. Those are two separate different issues.
Yes.
Two separate issues that justifiably, and as you will agree as technical people in government, that these justifiably make Ugandans uncomfortable.
Yes, indeed. And I think it was a healthy debate in Parliament about those two same issues. And I think in any parliamentary democracy, it's right that all the issues come, they're debated, and then they're cleared, so that everybody is at one in terms of what is happening and what the facts around the case is. And in this case, I think all the facts have come out. The truth of the matter is that this company was always owned by Uganda 100%. And also, when it comes to the names, it was approved by the government that the two ministries the two ministers would be the shareholders for this company. But the debate...
I need a clarification on that. The two ministers or the two ministries?
The
Which
two
is
ministries.
The ministries.
Yes. Okay.
The two ministries. Yes, correct. Yeah, you're right there. But if you look at the registration forms by Uganda Registration Services Bureau on this question of shareholding, whether it be Form 10 or Form 20,
Form 20.
it requires that you put either the names of the individuals or the names of the corporate shareholders on that form. So in this case, the registration was done with the name, particulars of the names of the individuals, which is the two ministers. So now the advice after debate was that you put the ministry name first and then the names of the individual, such that the form contains both particulars. So following strictly the form, obviously the right thing was done, but the desire was to indicate properly that the ministries were the shareholders, and that's the correction that was done, and rightly so, because at this time I think all of the documents are clear and everybody is at one as to who owns this company.
I think by the plan, Uganda Airlines will be back in the air before the end of this year. Is that correct?
Yes.
Correct.
If you're running 2 years down the road, Engineer Monique Antege Azuba is no longer minister, has been shuffled, and Matia Kasaija is no longer minister.
Yes.
And I walk up to you and say, look, we have documents here. We own this company called Uganda Airlines.
Yes.
Our names are registered against it. As individuals, we started a business and the company got registered. How do you walk yourself out of that? If they claimed ownership in their own capacity as private individuals.
Yes, I think is that now, and precisely the way you have put it, was the concern that was raised by parliamentarians. And I think it's the concern that the Ugandans had when they heard of this issue. But particularly, as I said, it arose because of the nature of the registration forms that were there, in that they require individuals and corporate shareholders. Having clarified that now, it means you have the name of the ministry first, and then the name of the incumbent minister for each of those ministries. So the problem that you raise, that tomorrow the minister might change, is still there, albeit there too, there is the portfolio and the name of the minister.
The question I'm actually trying to put, let me bring my colleagues Kasim and Irene into this discussion. Kasim, you spoke to the minister shortly after she had made her presentation before Parliament. The second presentation
Yes.
that seemed to clear the air. Do you feel convinced that the minister, Engineer Ntege Azuba, has been able to clarify and rest Ugandans' minds about this project? Because you're coming from a history, you're coming from a background. It's not the first company that's been incorporated by the government of Uganda, where the ministries' names are registered on the documents. You have a whole lineup of advisors. You have technical people in the Ministry of Works and Transport. You have technical people, including legal brains, in the Ministry of Finance. You have the entire machinery, the entire office of the Attorney General.
Attorney General, yes.
You have the Registration Services Bureau, all filled with technical people. How would something like this pass? Did the minister answer this to your satisfaction?
It wasn't. It wasn't answered to my satisfaction. And I think that's where the biggest worry was. However, I mean, what is without any doubt, talking to many people, even members of parliament, is the fact that there's no doubt that every Ugandan now would wish to have a national airline back in the skies. That is at least the starting point. However, the kind of inconsistencies that appeared during this particular process, the question then would be, what if Honorable Atim had not actually cited this particular, because it was from her particular concerns raised within the Committee of Budget, that's where the whole debate began. Actually, we're looking at the plenary as a final stage. The whole battle started from the Budget Committee, where Honorable Atim plus other members of Parliament had actually noticed these particular issues. Where I wasn't convinced is here. We were being told initially that the two shares, which is one that was being held by the Minister of Finance and the other held by the Minister of Works, there were this 1 million, that is out of 2 million shares, because that again wasn't cleared actually in the final declaration, which I think is still a bit of a worry. There were 2 million shares. Initially, it was 2 shares that were being, one share held by the Minister of Finance and the other share held by the Minister of Works, which left 1,990,000 blah, blah, blah number of shares to an anonymous shareholder. Until these particular questions were raised, then it went back, and now we ended up with the Minister of Finance now holding 1 million shares and the Minister of Works holding 1 million shares. So the entire 2 million shares now were able to be distributed equitably between the two ministries, and it is 100% government owned. That sudden change, I think, was a bit suspect in that particular instance, and it raised particular questions. So, in simple answer to your question, that is one area where I felt I was not particularly convinced. The idea that the registration service
you have Mr. Mulea here. You have he has a storied history, by the way, in airlines and management.
Definitely.
We were having a chat before we came on air. He has quite an experience. You have Susan here. Put the question to them.
No, that's the exact question I'm putting, because there were 2 shares that turned into 1 million shares or 2 million shares, which suddenly became 100% owned by government. There is a question here, but also too, and very importantly, having the bulk of the people that you've spoken about, the Attorney General's office especially, because these are the people that are supposed to advise government. For you to find, because when I spoke to Minister Azuba and even Minister David Bahati off the back of this passing of the supplementary budget, they were all saying this was a technical problem. So it was a failing of the technicians within the ministries that failed, the ministers. But now there were 2 questions which are very important. Do ministers ever read these things before they submit them? Because that was problematic. If you were going to come before Parliament, do the ministers get the time to read this? But also, too, should the technicians be there in the ministries? Now, given the fact that they are all throwing the flag back to them.
I think, let me address perhaps the first point on the number of shares. Yeah, the number of shares has not changed. It has always been 2 million shares in the company. The allotment proportion has not changed. It has always been 50-50, as envisaged in the memorandum and articles of association. What has changed are the facts surrounding the allotment process itself. So the facts, if I were to return to the facts of the matter, is that initially, when the company was incorporated, only 2 shares were nominally done, 50-50 between the 2 ministries, with the intention of doing the allotment at the time of funding. The funding was done in July 2018, and in July 2018, on the 11th, the further allotment to give 1 million shares to the Minister of Finance and 1 million shares to the Minister of Works was done. So this has always been the intention. So there has been no change at all.
So from 2
So
to
what?
1 million.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So Ugandans can rest assured that the shares have always belonged to Uganda. There was no anonymous shareholder, because for a shareholder to be there, he has to be allotted the shares.
But
so
my concern on the change of allocation, because you said initially it was 2 that were nominally allocated.
Yes, exactly, at incorporation, because the company had not yet been funded. Government funded the company in July, and in July on the 11th the allotment was done, because now the funds had come in to the 2 shareholders as originally intended. So I think those are the facts that did not clearly come out. At the time
there's another small fact that hasn't clearly come out. The debate, and it's played out in Parliament. It's played out with people as high as the level of government ministers.
Yes.
The ownership of the name Uganda Airlines.
Yes.
And the actual name in which, this is the Uganda National Airlines Company.
Yes.
Yes. What happened to the name? Who owns the name? what name is the national airline?
Okay, on that one, when the project was being conceptualized, which is back in December 2017, there was a feasibility study and then a business plan done to examine these issues. It was found through, obviously, you do a search at Registration Services Bureau, as rightly, all the legal minds, including Attorney General, was involved to look at that. They discovered that, of course, we had the former Uganda Airlines, which was under liquidation in 1999. Then there was Uganda Airlines Holdings Limited, which was also registered. And therefore, because those two companies existed, you couldn't directly register Uganda Airlines again. Because, first of all, the name has to be free. And secondly, you need to protect the new airline from the liabilities that would have accrued on these other old companies. So it was decided then that a new company be formed for these airlines, which is Uganda National Airlines Company Limited, incorporated on the 30th of January under the Companies Act 2001. So that would be the official name of the airline. But because the airline requires to use the brand for Uganda, which is Uganda Airlines, which we have always used in marketing, always used in promoting tourism, always used to ensure that the crane is up there in the sky, then it was approved that this brand name be used as a trade name for this airlines. That's why you will see on the livery of the aircraft, there will be Uganda Airlines. It's a trade name.
No private person owns the name Uganda Airlines.
No.
Those two companies that had Uganda Airlines were both owned by government of Uganda.
So where did the minister, I don't, maybe let me put this to you, the Minister of Finance said they went to check and found someone had registered the name privately.
Yes.
Yes,
That's,
and that
you know,
was told to Parliament.
Yeah, of course.
I don't could put a question to you. And then
Yes. You know, this is okay. I know you're technical and you're a publicist and you're trying to explain to us these things, but I'll speak for that Ugandan that really wants to know what happens in this country. You know, you come to a place where people are running up and down for approval of loads of money to do something that they themselves don't seem to understand. Now that is the Ugandan who is watching from a distance. And you know, the minister is saying, you do this today or we shall lose loads of money. The question is, where have you been? And can't we wait? Remember what the president said when we were beginning this Chisanja Kuna Mchezo? He said Uganda is going to become a very serious country. Number one, we are going to start prioritizing what we do. Number two, we are going to do things very, very seriously. Akuna Mchezo. That sounded too much like Mchezo to me. There's no way you can come and say, approve this money. We want it now. And then you see, then you say Uganda has 0.0001%. Then you come back and say, no, that's not what we said. Then, you know, in our minds, us who are just communicating to the world or who look at this on the side, we don't know what you're doing. You may know everything you're doing. But does it have to be that bad? I mean, then you come here and say, even when you simply say that simple thing that it will be on the craft you see Uganda Airlines, but the actual company that owns this is this. It is already playing in our minds, and you know we have gone through so many things. That's why now convincing Ugandans that what you're doing is actually, you know, I am so much with what the Deputy Speaker said. You know, he said, if I was the president of this country, heads would be rolling. And it is interesting that we Ugandans always wait for our heads to be rolled by someone else. I mean, can't you just remove your head sometimes if you realize it's not doing what you want it to do? I mean, if I came to this show and you people are talking about Uganda Airlines and I don't even know what it is, wouldn't I just be doing myself good and this show better if I just moved my head?
So let me come back, because you're dealing with a country where you have significant trust issues, especially on matters government. If we're to be honest to be candid about this, the former Uganda Airlines collapsed not because it was not viable as a business, but because it was eaten by people.
Poorly managed.
It was poorly managed. The handling services were pulled which was the cash cow, were pulled from under the rug of Ugandans and saw the airline collapse. You're trying to revive it almost 20 years later? Almost?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
almost 20 years
20
later.
years.
Yes, you're trying to revive it, and we are mad in all this confusion. How did you feel? You speak for the ministry. How did you feel sitting and watching your minister go through what she went through?
Of course, it was really stressful. It was stressful. And you could see that everyone was on their toes because of what was going on. And given the background that you have also just spoken about, already the Ugandans have trust issues with government, such that sometimes even when you're trying to do the right thing, you already know that the vibe out there is that we are doing the wrong thing. So you have this in your mind, as much as you're trying to do what's right. You know that out there, what is in people's minds is that these guys are up to no good. But as Mr. Mlea, I'll go back to what Mr. Mlea said initially. When you look at the documentation, I can say you have copies here. You see that with the issue of the shares, when you go back to the articles of association and all that, the original documents show that actually the right thing was done from the beginning. So the issue was communication at that level. Now, when they went to Parliament, I think that's where the mix-up, I think, happened.
No, but you had an earlier mix-up by the Minister of Finance, who said someone private had registered the name.
But you see that...
But you see that can't be lost on us as communicators to ask. What did we say before? What is out there in the public? What is the perception? He writes business plans for, you know, these big investments. You know that. You're testing out with a population that you're going to ask, one, for resources, like we're doing in this case, but two, that you're running a government project. You ask this question. So I would imagine that in the ministry, you look at these documents and say, what is likely to cause us trouble? Both before members of parliament and before the public. What have we said before? What has been said? What have people said about it? All those questions you're asking yourselves. And when the minister arrives and she apparently is unprepared and looks at the document and says, did I say this? And then, no, I'm going to put it back. There must be some...
Charles, also very importantly, I think, very, very importantly, is the fact that there has been a growing tendency within government to leave matters to the very last minute. Is it a deliberate ploy by government to create a sense of panic so as to pass things? There have been particular instances where we've had situations where things are left to the very last minute. Parliament was in panic. Parliament was pushed. Thursday things didn't happen, and then it was pushed to Friday morning. The whole idea was that we were about to miss a deadline and this is what would happen. In fact, an MP came up and raised an issue and said, do not rush us. According to the agreement, it has a 14-day delay. So even if it had not been sorted out by Friday, there was still 14 days to sort of deal with the particular details. My question then is, why leave particular proposals to the very last minute where we get into a particular panic? Probably it is this panic that actually brought the wrong documents. Because it might just be able to address
Let me just add something, because we're supposed to be taking a break. But yes,
second question, which was about, you said the Uganda Airlines is under liquidation. There has been an issue, remember, when we were dealing with the banks, because I said dealing with banks. We've had banks that have not been liquidated 20 years later. When you said you had feared to use, you couldn't go use Uganda Airlines because it is still under liquidation, has the liquidation process not completed? If it has not been completed, then if you're still going with Uganda Airlines as the brand that everybody knows, you're still falling into the same trap that you had avoided.
Okay. Hold your guns. We will take a quick commercial break, and when we come out, you will begin with answering these questions that Kasim is raising. We'll be right back. You're still watching The Fourth Estate, and we're coming live to you from Serena International Conference Center. We're discussing Uganda Airlines. The government, according to the plan that we have, now that Parliament approved the 280 billion shillings, and I understand the money was paid immediately. Has it been paid? Kasim asked a fundamental question. Mr. Malay, I want you to answer. We've been discussing the revival of Uganda Airlines since 2015.
Yes.
2015.
Yes.
Why wait up to a week to a deadline to go to Parliament and seek approval? How do you convince anybody watching you? And how would the minister convince anybody? Because you're holding a gun on the heads of these members of Parliament to say approve now or we're in trouble.
I think to answer that one, I would say, yes, there was no rush in terms of the project structure itself. As you rightly pointed out, Charles, it started in 2015 with a feasibility study and then business plan in 2017. And the request for monies and the investment required was very clear from the beginning. Obviously, government has internal processes to go through. And one of the healthy processes in a parliamentary democracy is, depending on the method that you use to finance a project, it either goes to Parliament for approval or it is financed within the budget. In this case, the decision was made to avoid burdening the airline with a lot of debt, because the original business plan, as you will recall, looked at financing through international finance parties, which means there was going to be some level of debt in the airline. So government, and I believe this was the correct decision, rightly decided that they are going to finance it from internal funds or domestic funds, and that is why the parliamentary process had to be followed. And let me say this, for me it is healthy that the debate was there to bring out all
Mr. Mlea, let me cut there.
Yes.
The part of doing public relations, Susan here can do effectively.
Yes.
My question, and the question that Kasim asked you,
Yes.
and Irene asked you, is very clear.
Yes.
We knew, and it's a good thing, at the East African, we wrote a story to say President Museveni had insisted on domestic financing of Uganda Airlines and its revival. So that was clear. The question is, why wait for the last minute? You've made an order with two reputable international airline manufacturers, Airbus and Bombardier.
Yes.
You've made a deposit.
Yes.
You have identified what you want. We have seen images which Irene and her colleagues in government were sharing with all of us of the test flight, the testing of the aircraft that we're supposed to receive next month. Why go 2 days, 3 days, a week to a deadline to say, Parliament, give me money now?
Or Bombardier takes the thing.
No, you know, actually,
What went wrong there?
well, you said public relations should be left to me. You know, I think, as he has clearly said, really, that there are internal processes. First of all, there are internal processes, and which are healthy. But also, it's not that it was at the end. It was at the end of 3 days to the what we would look at as a deadline that that the ministers went to Parliament to seek this approval. This is something that has been going on since, I think, January. Since January, this has been going on. But I believe there may have been other business that Parliament had to handle, and this was just one of those things that you realize time has gone, and actually it's something that is very important that we should handle.
And the minister, who is a member of Parliament, and the Minister of Finance were not meeting the Speaker of Parliament and the team at Parliament to say, wait a minute, we have seen the order paper, our issue is not, no, actually, even before you go the order paper, because that's plenary, to the committee, we have this issue, the committee is not moving on it. We have this issue, the committee is not moving on it. And you're having discussions with the committee and its leadership since January?
Well, I know for sure at least meetings have been going on. That has been happening with the committee. That has been happening. It's not that these meetings have not been taking place.
So why did we see this in the last week? Was that a problem of Parliament? Was it a problem at the asking ministries, which is finance and works?
Of course, the ministry goes to Ministry of Finance to seek for this funding, and then it has to be approved by Parliament. But as I said, those internal processes did take longer than they should have, And that's why we are seeing all of this stampede, which I believe could have been avoided, really.
Okay. Maybe we need to move on to some nicer things about Uganda Airlines.
But before we move on, Charles.
The liquidation, Charles. The liquidation.
Before we move on, Charles, there's something that is kind of worries.
Yes.
Something that kind of worries me is whenever they say, somebody comes and looks at the documents and says things that are alarming, then the person says, oh no, these are not the documents. The fact that there are some documents that are alarming, I mean, okay, the correct documents were brought, but where did those documents that speak things that scare everyone come from? I mean,
Yes,
I think Charles.
at least let him come and let the minister come and say, I don't have any documents. I don't know. I brought something else. I brought something for standard gauge radio. I'm sorry. But I don't want someone to come and say things that are alarming. Then they go away and say, oh, actually, those were the wrong documents. And they come back with something else. Where did those ones come from?
I think on the documents, Charles, I thought we had cleared that one earlier with the chronology of events. Remember that there were, after debate, there were corrections that were to be made. And one of the issues, apart from the name, was the fact that there needed to be proof of the filing that was done on the 11th of July. And then that filing subsequently, because of the issue of the names, had to be corrected. The issue which you said were alarming was simply because at the time that the fresh filing was done, those corrections which were required as debated by the budgetary committee had not been properly registered. So that once that was done, there was nothing wrong with the documents at all. And that's why the issue was finally cleared and everybody was able to move forward.
Okay, Mr. Malaya, a quick question here.
Yes.
This was a second payment, wasn't it? The one that we're seeking approval for.
Yes.
Yeah, this is the final payment.
The final payment. So how was the first payment done?
Yeah.
Who did it on whose behalf?
Yeah. I think as I explained, the company was funded in July with the initial equity. So from those operational funds, it was decided that the aircraft deposit be paid. So government funded it in July 2018, and then some allocation of money was given to pay to Bombardier and Airbus.
So the first money didn't need parliamentary
No,
approval?
that was from within our
it was
budget.
from
That was
within
from
the
within our budget.
Yes.
How much are we spending on the aircraft, both for Bombardier and for Bombardier and for Airbus?
The CRJ 900, which is for Bombardier, each of the aircraft costs approximately $27.7 million US dollars. So you have 4 of them, which takes it to 110.8 million.
Okay.
For the wide body aircraft, those ones are more expensive, and so we are looking at 108 million each. And therefore, as you know, the manufacturing process, you keep paying deposits. We call them pre-delivery payments. So it takes 2 years to manufacture a wide body aircraft. So for the A330-800, you're looking at 18 months to 24 months to get it delivered, and you go on do periodic inspections. So during that process, for them to start, you have to pay periodic deposits along the way.
Okay.
So there was an installment that was required to be paid also by 31st March.
To Airbus.
To Airbus.
And has that installment
Yes,
been paid?
all those payments were the ones that
Were done initially.
were being targeted to be completed at this time.
What's the business case you guys are making? And I want to concentrate on Mulea here for this. Airlines in the region are failing. The biggest is Kenya Airways. It's struggling. South African Airways is struggling. Rwanda Air is working under heavy subsidy from the government of Rwanda. Tanzania is reviving its airline, Air Tanzania. Nigeria is reviving is it Nigeria Airlines or Air Nigeria? I don't know what the name is.
Right.
And we have an experience as a country. I know it's late to be asking this question. We have an experience as a country where we had an airline that was flying and stopped flying. We've made attempts, partly private, partly government, to get the national flag back in the air,
Yes.
and we have failed. And when we see what we saw in Parliament last week, we're asking, what's the business case you're making? What are the guarantees that you will actually fly and stay in the air and make a profit?
Look at the fundamentals of Uganda, because for an airline to be successful, there has to be enough business for it, both now and into the future. So you project and look at the statistics for Uganda: 40 million people in this country, with a growing middle class, with an economy that has a healthy growth rate. Currently 1.6 to 2 million air travelers per year, out of which 60% are Ugandans. The market size for this country in terms of air travel spend, you are talking of $500 million per year currently. In 10 years' time, if you project and look at all the forecasts, it means air travel is going to double. You are talking of approximately 3 million people flying by air this time. Average fares of the order of average spend per person of the order of $400, $450. So that's a big market size. And secondly, 60% of these are Ugandans right now. So what do the Ugandans need? They need a proper schedule out of here that is convenient. They need an airline that can schedule flights to the points where they're traveling. And remember, this is a demand-driven plan. We are not speculating about the traffic. The traffic is already there going to these points. So if the airline can have a good service, as you can see already, the start is correct, because you're not starting with second-hand aircraft. You are starting with the right technology that allows you to operate those flights at a cost structure that can be supported by the current fares. So that is a big plus. When you move forward to long haul again, there was a big debate on this. It has turned out that the right technology was chosen. So those are fundamentals that would give you confidence. The other part which you must consider is a 2-year feasibility was done, which was looking at integration across all sectors of the economy. And it was found that the economic benefit to this country for having this airline far outweighs the investment cost, and it will be recouped very quickly back to this nation. The other, probably one of the biggest advantage that you would see from this airline is that up to now, Ugandans have been marginalized in this sector of aviation, which is a growing business or a growing sector worldwide. And it is going to be even more so into the future. So do you really want to leave it to other countries to participate in this industry, be able to fly, be able to be pilots, be able to be engineers without you, and you are spending money to grow the economies of these countries of the orders that we have already mentioned?
As a sales pitch, that makes a lot of sense. But
yes,
the examples that we used, South Africa is a bigger economy.
Yes.
It's a larger country, both for domestic travel and international travel, and in the region.
Yes.
It has more middle-class people able to travel and traveling the world. Same as Kenya, it's a bigger economy, more travelers, more experience in traveling by air than Ugandans are.
Yes.
Because here you can hardly sustain even domestic flights that should cost much less. The fundamental question you don't answer for me is, why is Kenya Airways struggling, for example? They're saying now if they don't give them the handling services, if they don't give them Jomo Kenyatta to manage Jomo Kenyatta, they will be in trouble. They'll stop flying. South African Airways is facing exactly the same trouble. And Uganda Airlines is not talking about that, especially when you're looking at what made the original Uganda Airlines collapse.
Okay. Let me address those points, and you raise some very, very valid points on that. Kenya Airways, I won't speak for them, but I'll say that like any company, companies go through good times and hard times. And the same has been for Kenya Airways or South African or the other carriers that you have mentioned. They have seen some good times and then they have gone through periods of bad time. If it takes specifically for our region, a few years ago, Kenya was doing very well. And then secondly, within a very short period of time, we had the issue of terrorism in the region. We had a fire at Jomo Kenyatta Airport. We had Ebola in Africa, which caused the cessation of all the routes. We had the economy worldwide going into a recession, such that the oil price came down. And when you are hedging for, like most other airlines, on the oil prices, then it means you have to post collateral. So that explains actually some of the problems that we are seeing. But going back specifically to the periods when these airlines were doing well, what were the fundamentals? They were properly capitalized. They had skills, both in terms of technical skills, human and others. They were also properly managed with skills that were sourced. It didn't matter where people came from, but they were sourced the best in the industry. And the successful carriers, whether you talk of the Middle East, whether you talk of America, Europe, those ingredients are there.
Mm-hmm.
The second issue is the integration across the other sectors. Specifically in the Middle East, you see integration between the airline, the airport, the handling companies, immigration, hotel. All those are integrated frameworks. And that's why perhaps you see next door that they are seeking to do the same thing.
Mm. I have seen a report of the collapse of, the struggles of Kenya Airways. And none of those actually stand out as the reasons. It's not the Ebola in West Africa. It's not the terrorist attacks, because Westgate came when Kenya Airways was already beginning to struggle.
Of course.
The report talks about management. The report talks about corruption. The report talks about how managers of Kenya Airways were the ones in the business of selling fuel to run those aircraft, and the difference they're making off the pump price and what the aircraft is paying, and whether they're supplying or not. And the question Ugandans would be asking, with our history of corruption, with our endemic management challenges, how have you thought through those? What guarantees can you give Ugandans? How can you convince Ugandans watching you now, and those who are watching the drama in Parliament, that you have fixed these fundamentals? Because I think those are critical for me. When you talk about them for Kenya Airways, when you talk about them for South African Airways, exactly the same. Maybe for Wow Airlines, which collapsed, just closed the other day, leaving passengers at the airport without alerting them. There might be some other issues. Let's speak to these ones that are still able to.
May I please just add, so that maybe he answers both together.
Okay.
The other issues, you've mentioned South African Airlines. Since 1997, the government has been pumping money into South African Airlines just to keep it afloat. So it's not just something that is just begun
And to
today.
keep the flag in the air,
To keep
for
the
that
flag,
integration
so
of
it's really it's about the status of the country.
Yes.
Kenya Airways, $200 million almost being pumped in annually just to keep it afloat. These are facts that are on the ground. But now coming to what I would feel worried more about,
Yes.
in terms of the business plan. 35% of all global trade is contributed by air cargo. Africa only has 1.9% of that. In the business plan, do we have an idea? Because probably Ugandans actually have been suffering more in terms of the cargo than the travel, than the passenger travel. Because from the sound of it, you sound like you're just talking about more about the passengers, 60% being passengers, but especially about cargo, because that's where the suffering has been. And that's where other airlines, for example, like Rwanda Air, has got it very right, especially tapping into the West African market. They are getting lots of passengers from Nigeria because the connection is much faster in comparison to many of the other airlines. But importantly, South African Airlines, Kenya Airways are all sort of government managed. The only successful airline on the continent is Ethiopian Airline, and that is not government run. The idea from Parliament that came from Parliament on Friday was the fact that the issue of management now should be given to a private-led sort of management instead of having government, because they're talking about the endemic corruption, the lack of trust that already the public has. Is that something that probably...
And maybe just to add something small, you're talking, I hear a lot of people who talk about Uganda Airlines talk about tourism. We need to look at the numbers. How many tourists is Ethiopia receiving because it has a national flag in the air?
Sorry, let me just add a small thing.
Yes.
You know, there's something you said about the number of Ugandans that travels, that you imagine will be using Uganda Airlines. But I don't know if you've heard about Bubu.
Bubu?
By Uganda.
By Uganda.
Yes.
Beyond Uganda.
Yes.
That thing is just there to convince Ugandans to trust Ugandan products. You're going to have a lot of work convincing Ugandans to use Uganda Airlines. I'm telling you the truth. Because for some reason, Ugandans have lost trust in everything Ugandan, whether you want to believe it or not. Because of those things that happen before we do things or as we are doing things. Ugandans have kind of lost trust in many things. I don't want to go into all the other things that you know, but you know, everything you say, you know, this is going to be like this. You know, even our ministers, everything, you know, Ugandans just believe. They have reached that point where everything Ugandan, made in Uganda, is just saying, you just imagine all these cutaway things. So you have a lot of work to do. I know.
Isn't that a job for Ugandans, you think?
What?
To love their country more and buy their...
Exactly, but that's what I'm saying. So why do you think...
I thought you were asking the wrong
I'm
part.
not asking him, but I'm questioning him.
Yes.
Why do you think this percentage of Ugandans that travel is going to use your airline? Ugandans will comfortably tell you, no,
We want the pride of
I'm going
Uganda.
to use Kenya Airways.
Yes.
Yes, they will.
Sure.
Yes. Let me attempt now to answer this question. And I think there are good answers to all these questions. First of all, on the trust issue, if I may address it first. The trust issue is done one person at a time. There is no way you can go and get everyone to trust you and say, okay, now 1 million people trust me. It goes one by one. So you trust me, then you tell the next person the basis of your trust. The next person begins to have a positive image of who and what I am. So I think this is the work, like Charles has said, this is the work for all Ugandans to begin to start building trust in themselves. Because for a long time, and this is one argument which I have seen across many countries in Africa, for a long time we have been told that we can't do certain things simply because we are from this continent. And one of the things that we have been conditioned not to believe is that we can't run a successful airline business. I don't believe that that is the case. I believe that there are structures and systems that can enable us to run a successful airline business like any other person. And therefore, I believe that those things that you have mentioned, which detract, and by the way, they don't only destroy airlines, they will destroy any other company. If there is corruption, if there is nepotism, there is what? Any company will not survive. It's not unique to airlines. So now that we know the ingredients, what makes an airline successful, we have to work hard to protect this investment, which is very dear, and I like the word you use, that all Ugandans have been looking forward to this. So we need to work hard and protect it from all those things which are obvious to us, because they take away from the investment that we are making and the future that Ugandans wants to look forward
Let
to.
me just put a short one, Susan, before you respond. You say 1.6 million, 1.62 million people are traveling. 60% of them are Ugandans. And the question almost everybody has been asking, if they're traveling now, why do you think that, which is related to Irene's question, why do you think that now all of them should troop back to Uganda Airlines if they are already traveling anyway?
I think on that one, look at the fundamentals of the business plan. To get into any business, you have to work up your market share and target your market share. the business plan is moving on a gradual basis. As you can see, the first few years we are targeting 24% market share. And if you look at all the competitors,
isn't it?
no, all the competitors, and quite frankly, if you're a home carrier and you can't even get 24% of your market, you shouldn't really be in business. But having said that,
if you look, that's the first 2 years.
The first few years.
The first few years is how many years?
The
first 2 years, how many?
First 2 years.
First 2 years.
Yeah.
So if 2 years down the road, just a moment.
Yes.
If 2 years down the road, you don't have 24% of the market share, should we call you back here and ask and say, you don't have 24% now, you have 14%?
Why?
Eh?
May God forbid.
Is that a question we should be calling you to ask you here?
Actually, I don't want to be caught in percentage, but let me tell you this. Obviously, that is very conservative. It's very, very conservative indeed in terms of the plan. And if you look at the targets over these next few years, we believe that they are really realistic, and we believe that they reflect the fundamentals of what this airline would achieve. And as you know, it's starting first with the regional business to provide the connectivity, the standards, the network that would feed into the international. So those fundamentals and the realistic nature of the steps to get to the vision which Ugandans are looking for is, I think, what is important in terms of success. And also the issue that you have raised of having the proper skills and management to overcome those challenges.
Susan, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I really wanted to comment on the trust issue. You know, even the Bible says that what you fear the most will actually befall you. I think we have to reach that point as Ugandans where we start loving our country beyond anything else. And we come to that point where we trust ourselves with certain things, because if all the time when we have people put in certain places, what we do is see failure, then we are going to fail to do anything. We should come to that point where we realize that there are actually people who have good intentions for this country and who are working so hard to ensure that certain things are put in place. And referring to as to why people would since they've already been traveling, why would they use Uganda Airlines anyway? I believe that it's a matter of choice, and given what incentives will be put in place, already when Parliament approved this, from the opposition, generally the House, you could see there was, everybody loved this. When you go out there, you see the vibe. People want the airline back. So that shows that there is already support. There are trust issues, but there is already support. And people believe that this is something that can actually
you agree with me that trust should be earned. It shouldn't just be demanded. It should be earned.
Of course, yes, trust should be earned. And he said, as he rightly said, this is earned day by day, one by one. Eventually, the way you do things, eventually, yes, you may have made mistakes, but you correct your mistakes, you put yourself out there, and people will start seeing you as that which you're trying to portray. So for me, I really believe this is something that should be supported, and we should all look at it as a good project, support it, and let us have the crane flying.
You should convince us that you have a good project, that you have the right management people that are going to fly this. I shouldn't be spending my $400. I mean, you have the Kampala, the Entebbe Nairobi route, the most expensive route in the world. But Ugandans are still paying for it. They're still paying expensively to go elsewhere. If they're going to put their money into Uganda Airlines as travelers, not as taxpayers, but as travelers, they need to be able to be convinced that one, they'll get a good service, that's worth their money.
Yes.
That number two, they are not going to be seated next to people who are traveling because they have been given cheats to travel,
Exactly.
and you're billing government at the end of the day, and government is not going to pay, and they're going to fall back on the taxpayer to shoulder that burden. But let me take just a few messages. I know, Kasim, you want to say something.
Just one quick.
Just one moment.
No problem.
Uganda Airlines is a profit-driven business. It is not a statutory body. Government should own it via Uganda Development Corporation as the corporate shareholder. Incumbents at UDC sign as directors, who can be replaced once they leave the portfolio. And then he adds and says, Uganda Airlines falls under the EVA class of business. EVA is economic value addition beyond balance sheet profitability. It serves a wider spectrum of benefits as opposed to ROS. ROS means focused businesses. ROS means return on shareholder equity.
Yeah.
What do you say? Why don't you house this under Uganda Development Corporation instead of the ministry?
Of course, those were the recommendations.
Parliament,
That's what Parliament recommended. But remember that this now would again have to go back to cabinet. It's not a decision that.
Okay. Bernard Impero says the biggest problem is with the legal department, which is the Attorney General's office. Registering a business venture like Uganda National Airlines would require scrutiny at every stage by the legal teams to avoid such illegalities. And he says this shows that probably even the persons who are moving those documents for registration were not from the right department. That ought to have known the legal they ought to have known the legal implications. The ministers make mistakes by doing work which is meant to be done by technocrats in the ministry. And he adds and says, can you clarify on the rumors that NHA's contract at airport expired on 2013, yet that company is still handling airport cargo today? There's nobody from NHAS here. I don't have the facts. I'll not be able to answer that, Bernard, for you. When we have the if I get the answers during the break, I'll be able to come back and give you the answers. You are talking only negatives about Uganda Airlines. This someone has it. Linus Ngompek. He is the Agago resident district commissioner. Isn't there any positives? Madame Onyango shouldn't generalize Ugandans because not all of us have lost hope. Susan, shall Hoima International Airport accommodate our planes too, or it's only for Entebbe Airport? You'll answer that after the break because I'm being told I'm oversaying. Someone says, Ugandans, don't you think that Ugandans deserve an explanation of what befell the old airline? Similar mistakes could happen with the new one. Pardon my pessimism. Airlines world over have a history of making few or no profits. However, it comes with benefits. Some Ugandans get jobs and get exposed. Lincoln Sayuni. And then I also take, there's quite a bit of debate on Twitter. I'll be picking some of those. Julia Sankunda is asking the question, can that advisor help me understand this? If the company, Uganda National Airlines Company, had been registered in error, had already entered into contract by order of aircraft purchase, what implications, legal and otherwise, does it have as there are material changes on one party, from Matia Kasaija, Monica Zuba, to Minister of Finance, Minister of Transport and Works? You'll answer those after a very short commercial break. Welcome back to this last segment of the Fourth Estate. The questions that were put from both viewers and coming from the panel here. Kasim, you had a question for Conwell?
Yes, my question was is about the airline business in general. One of the biggest problems, especially on the African continent, has been the issue of very high taxes and then the issue of regulations. Despite there being many facilities to try to enhance that. In America, for example, in 1978, remember Jimmy Carter signed this Airline Deregulation Act, which I think opened up the airspaces and made the flying much cheaper. It didn't happen until 1997 in Europe, when they actually opened up and then we started getting the likes of Ryanair. Charles was talking about Nairobi, Kampala being the most expensive route. Yet that could actually come down, especially when you have several airlines to play with. So in terms of Uganda Airlines, and we are looking at the business plan now in terms of the way forward, how are you going to get around this? There have been several acts and conferences and summits in which agreements have been signed and they've never taken off the ground. How are you going to be dealing with the issue of high taxes, especially on landing or flying over countries' spaces, and then the issue of regulation?
Okay, those are very valid points, and you raise them very well. Maybe just to deal with this route issue between Nairobi and Entebbe being the most expensive. There are many airlines flying on that route, and obviously the route is still very expensive for Ugandans.
What explains that?
The only time that the route was cost effective was during the period when you had an airline based in Uganda. So you see, the obvious thing is that when you have your own home-based airline, you get reasonable rates. Yeah. So despite the competition that you have Kenya Airways, you have Rwanda Air, you have Jumbo Jet, you have East African flying on that route. We are still having
have
motion.
Fly 540. I don't know if you still.
Yeah, I think it's still there. So 5 airlines on the same route, you are still saying the fares are expensive. The reason is obvious. It's because no one of your own is operating to bring pressure on the competition. The issue of deregulation, as you know, in the AU, African Union, there has been a lot of work done to make the Africa Single Sky initiative, which would get over the current, what we call bilateral air services agreements. The rights that an airline uses to fly to another country are given by the state of that country. So a national carrier here uses the rights of the state to go to other countries. They have to be designated. And you sign with the other country and agree what frequencies, what structures will be operated between the two, how will the airlines be managed, which points of entry are you going to get. So largely that is what's still governing most of the African skies. So there is a move away from that to open skies
Have we
within
signed
Africa.
up the open skies as Uganda?
Several countries, Uganda has not yet done that, but as you know, several countries have started to do that.
Yes.
And obviously the winners are the first movers in terms of having their own strong home-based airlines. And that is what is going to lead the day. Once you get into a market and you've been given rights, it's very difficult to take them away. In fact, you can't. So that's the issue that has been bugging most countries, in that they realize that their own airlines are not strong enough to be able to take advantage of this initiative. The question is, how do you make those airlines strong? How do you participate in the industry? And one of the key ways is obviously what the government of Uganda is doing through this project.
Which is?
Which is to invest into your own home-based carrier that is going to adequately compete with the others, and put out schedules and standards and aviation transport, both for passengers and cargo, that will compete with other carriers so that you benefit from competitive rates.
Let me maybe put this question.
Yes.
And I want to put it to you, Susan. When you look across government and its functionality, and to be fair, Linus, I know, has issues with how much patriotic we are, but you can't be blindly patriotic. You need to ask some hard questions sometimes. When you look across the spectrum of government, where are you benchmarking as the epitome of efficiency, especially in a sector that, pardon my French, fat cats would have an interest in, or who want to travel first class or business class? I don't know if you have a provision for first class on the airline. Want to travel, whether they have money or they don't have money. What are you benchmarking on to say we will be different? We will not be like the others.
One thing is that at least I know that we are going to go the way of ensuring that I think most of our government travels are on our airlines. I think that's what we're going to do. That's what has been proposed. All government travels will be on carriers, so that makes it that makes it different. And
did government pay for their tickets of the former Uganda Airlines? Were they paying for them?
Well, that's something that I'm not so sure of.
Is that something you need to guard yourself against? Because if you look across, one of the biggest
when you're on official duty,
one of the biggest datas, a domestic date is huge.
Yes.
And that's government procuring services, which it doesn't pay for. So if you have government, you have on paper, government owes you so many billions in tickets you have issued, and they haven't paid for them. How do you plan to keep the Uganda Airlines in the air if you're going to rely heavily on government travel?
Well, it's not, Charles will supplement on that, but I believe, as we have said, first, of course, your first clients, you're looking at the officials who are traveling to do government work. Then you will also, as he has really explained, you will also have other Ugandans who will travel on this airline. So it's...
Conway, help us here. I know
Yeah.
you've managed a number of airlines. You have a long history from about 1995?
Yes.
Yes,
correct.
1995. And some of these run quite profitably when you run them. My question is, how do you navigate where government is going to write and say, no, we have approved, we shall pay, and they never actually get to pay?
I will just tell you what has been used in other countries to overcome this problem. Usually in other countries, the airline agrees with the accountant general to say that each of the government ministries, depending on the level of travel, the accountant general will pay the airline on a specific date every month, a provisional amount for the travel, pending reconciliation at the end of the month when all the travel will be paid. So that works well in other countries because the government is obligated to pay for the tickets, and then once you reconcile, then they pay the balance. So that improves the cash flow of the airline to make sure that it's coming in. And that is very important because you have to feed your baby for the baby to grow. If you starve the baby, then the baby will not grow. So in this case, I think the intention of government...
Do you see some of the cartoons that we run in our newspapers with a cow that's being milked without being fed? Have you seen some of them?
I have not seen that particular one.
I think Ugandans are too familiar with some of
Supplementary
those
budget.
Okay, can I just, there's something I wanted to just add on what Charles was saying.
Conwell.
Oh, sorry, Conwell. Sorry. You know, there's something that happens. Okay, I know Linus doesn't like it when I generalize Ugandans, but we need to take cautions, especially when it comes to government-owned parastatals. It happened in so many parastatals. The issue of human resource. When you think about issues of competence and issues of conflict of interest, and then the cheats, give this one this. I don't know how I need an answer there, because I know what kills some of the government departments or parastatals is because people say, give Irene this job. It doesn't matter whether Irene does the work well or not. And I have seen so many airlines lose clients because of simple things like a rude air hostess, small things like stolen luggage. Somebody says, I'll never go back to that airline. I'll never, those are the things that look like they are, they don't mean anything to some people. And when you talk about them, people think you're being funny or you're being naive. But those are the real reasons why people leave. Why people say, I'll never get on that airline. And those are the things we need to look at
Even
now.
if you have paid
Whether
up
we
on
love
another.
yes, whether we know we're generalizing Ugandans or not, whatever
Yes,
it is.
it's true.
Those are the things I need to hear you, say something about. Because that's what matters to us. For some of us, if I'm going to fly Uganda Airlines, I may not even think about the profits you're making or not, but if I'm comfortable on the plane, tomorrow I'll not even think about all those things. I may not think about them.
Yes.
Conwell, you also this is a small comment from Sydney Kaye Rugwaje. He says whatever should be discussed now is how this airline should be managed and prevented from being eaten like the one that crashed in 2001.
Yes.
It will obviously be hard in the beginning, but with what is happening even before the planes are here, we need prayers. Yes, you could respond.
Yes, I think prayers are always appropriate, definitely. And I'm sure he's praying for us to be very successful. So I really commend him for that. And I thank him for his support. The issue of service is paramount. You can't compromise on service and standards. And this is why I said in the beginning, it was very appropriate to buy the correct technology to adequately compete. And let me say that, for example, the CRJ 900 aircraft that we are getting, Uganda will be the first airline in Africa to fly this technology.
Yes.
And so you are getting the best product, which we believe that Ugandans will love. What we need, as you say, are the correct soft skills and standards to operate an international airline. So, what has been done so far, whether it be, let me put an example of recruitment. Recruitment was done using the most secure channels. Where the team was not receiving any applications by hand or anybody. Nobody was coming to see anyone. They were all to apply online, submit their documents. The documents are uploaded, the documents are reviewed, and the people who are on merit are called for interviews.
There's someone called Mary Serumaga who asked this question right at the beginning and said, when did Uganda Airlines advertise for the advisory job? Did you really apply? And can you tell us who was on the panel interviewing you and others?
That's a good one.
That is a very good question.
It's my Angel Richard actually was asking that question.
Yes, that is a very good question. But as you know, Charles, I'm not here to talk about myself.
Yes.
Let me concentrate on the issues. I know maybe that issue is burning in his heart, but let me just concentrate on the issues pertaining to the project itself.
Okay.
And really the wish, as you have said, in fact, even when this project was being approved, it was emphasized that government will pay for its tickets in Uganda Airlines. And that is the position of government as an investor in the airline as well as a user of this product.
Joachim Buembo says, last time government invested in a company without an act of parliament was in Speak Resort Munyonyo, and 3 ministers ended up facing criminal charges. Akasaija and Azuba safe this time.
Well, I've not had anything contrary to that. I would want to believe that they are safe.
Okay. Jose Nwabine, I believe is in Kabola Diantonde, says, I think time has come for us to stop getting surprised at the blatant mistakes which our ministers and technocrats make. Remember the statement by former Minister Saida Bumba, which was to the effect that she signed Umeme agreements without reading them?
Yes.
No mistake should now get us surprised. Musa Ladu says, I am also hearing that the name Uganda Airlines and its routes were sold. Mr. Malaya, I should ask you whether you have heard of the same or related claims.
I have heard those claims, but I can say categorically that the rights for the former Uganda Airlines were never sold. The rights belong to the state. Currently, I think Uganda has signed over 47 bilateral air services agreements, which are waiting for this airline to start its operations and it to be designated.
Okay.
Those are the rights that Uganda has.
Okay, someone here says, Susan, you said the processes were going on since January, but why the messes? And then he adds, I think this is a joke, or whoever is sending this message, says the MPs with A-level or its equivalent wanted to visit and confirm the fixing of tires and other accessories on the aircraft.
Trust
Why the
issues.
messes?
Well, as I said earlier, really, that is something that is difficult to know if you're not within Parliament, if you're not directly handling those processes.
Yeah.
What we know is that the funding process started as early as January. Why it has taken so long up to as of last week, really that is between Parliament and Finance.
Finance
So
office.
it's
Gad Bender is watching us and says the ground handling should revert back to Uganda Airlines for sustainability. Mr. Malaya, what do you say?
I can't comment. I can only comment on the plan in the business plan. In the business plan as structured, the airline will build capacity to handle itself. For that, you require to buy the necessary equipment, you require to train your staff, you require to have all the technology that allows you to handle both passengers and cargo, and that's what the airline is going to do. After it has capacity to handle itself, then it can obviously look for other clients.
Colin, you've mentioned something about the Uganda being the first country, I think, to use the CRJ 900, the technology. Given the scare that we've just had with the Boeing Max 8, has this been tested? Has this airline been, this aircraft been tested for us to be sure that we are going in as the first in Africa.
And
It's good to be fast, but it's also untested waters.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about the new cabin.
Oh, this
design.
is the cabin. It's
Yes,
not,
otherwise
it's not the aircraft itself.
No,
because
no,
Kenya
no.
Airways was still going ahead with the delivery of the Boeing Max 8, from what I heard.
No, you'll be happy with the new cabin. This is the latest in terms of the new cabin.
These were the
This
MCs what to go and say.
Exactly. Otherwise, it's a tested product.
Nteja Simwe says, if we can't manage Uganda Railways or any other public transport system, how can we manage complex air transport? And then says, Susan, Honorable Sechikuba said on the floor of Parliament on Friday that this was not Uganda's project, but rather Kutesa's project. What can you say?
Well, one, I'll start with the complexity of the project. There is no project that is not complex, at least for all the projects that I've seen in regard to transport. All projects are complex. And I think it's also important to note that there are projects that we have delivered, and yet they are quite complex projects as a sector. So this is just one of those projects, and I strongly believe that we will deliver. And in regard to what Honorable Sechikubo said, that I cannot comment, because those are his views, that is his opinion. I have no idea where he gets that from. I don't have information as to in that regard, so I really...
Okay. I have a message here. Someone says, can someone explain the correct process that should have been followed in shareholding allotment? For instance, how was it decided to allot 2 million shares? Then I think it was reported that each share was valued at a paltry 100 shillings. How was this determined? Also, are there plans to float these shares or part of these shares on the stock exchange at some point in future? Also, are there plans for domestic routes? And he also adds, on trust, it's not about Ugandans not loving their country. Far from it. It's about the quality of service, reliability, safety standards, etc. We all want to use Uganda Airlines, but those concerns have to be addressed. Government will have to elevate standards in all respects, not the business as usual, as we're used to. Laxity will not cut in the aviation sector. Additionally, with the way Uganda run Uganda Telecoms, in a sector that's more profitable, how can people be optimistic when the same government is going into a much less profitable, competitive sector of commercial aviation? Mr. Malaya?
I think the first thing to realize is that Uganda is a landlocked country.
Exactly.
The airline is an infrastructure project. We have already had history where there were troubles in the surrounding countries, and this nation did not have its destiny in terms of air transport in its hands. So the right to have access to other places and conduct business is critical, that you have an airline, especially in the position that Uganda is there.
Okay, I'm afraid our time is out. Actually, we need to get out of here now. I'll just take one message from Crispin Kaheru, who says, Mulea sounds convincing, but not too convincing. Those guys seem to brush this off as a mistake that has been corrected. But this is not one of those he forgot to cross the T kind of error. Next on the agenda is to liquidate this Uganda Airlines. I don't know what you have to say to Crispin.
As you say, you have to build on the trust. We have gone through a vigorous debate, which is healthy in a parliamentary democracy. I believe it's very healthy to debate the issues. But it's also important to remember the facts on the ground. And I believe that we have presented the facts to him. I would urge him to look at the facts on the ground and then form an opinion on that.
Okay, our time is out. I'm afraid I will not be able to take some of the messages. I see a message here from, let me see, just one more message and then we'll get out of here. Yes, this gentleman, I have to read his message, no matter what. Gift of Nansana is actually still recovering in hospital in India, in Mumbai. And he says, it's a good morning here in Mumbai. Thanks for the show. Sometime in 1999, veteran journalist Charles Onyango Obo, in his ear to the ground column in the Monitor newspaper, described Uganda Airlines as a flying coffin. It should be recalled that at the time, there was public outcry over the airlines, as it had been mismanaged, and indeed, during the privatization of public enterprises, the Uganda Airline Corporation was not spared. Unfortunately, the privatization process of the airlines was fraudulently conducted. It's on record that while Uganda Airlines was in the intensive care unit, feeding on approximately 33 million shillings per day to keep it alive, Mr. Kirunda Kivejinja was busy selling the Uganda Airlines routes without consulting the privatization unit nor the Civil Aviation Authority, whose legal mandate was to designate those routes. The chaos that characterized it itself haven't spared the efforts of its resurrection. Ugandans, let's pray for the best out of this. Susan, do you want to respond to this? Because it mentions what appears to him to be facts. I need you to clarify this, and then we'll get out of here.
Yes, I see in there he talks about the routes having been sold, but as far as I know, the routes are owned by Uganda. They are still ours, so I believe his that information is not correct.
Gift, to make you even a little bit more comfortable.
We own our routes.
Okay, to make Gift a little bit more comfortable, one of the biggest fights between Uganda and Rwanda has actually been what is called fifth freedom rights, and that has something to do with the routes,
routes
because
yes.
government was insisting that it needed to keep them, even when other airlines were requesting for them and asking that they could be using them since we don't have a national carrier at the moment. I'd like to thank you very much. Thank you, Susan, for making time for the show. Thank you, Mr. Mulea. We'll be watching closely. Understand when do the bombardiers, the Embraers, arrive here? Are they Embraers?
No, it's here.
The
Bombardiers.
Bombardiers.
Yes, the Bombardiers. When do they get here?
We are looking at mid
April.
Mid-April.
Yes.
Okay. And when do they begin actually flying?
There is a 90-day certification process, so we are looking again at mid this year.
Okay. So we can begin booking our tickets now.
Yes, yes. Now the processes, now that the airline has been funded, all the remaining processes are going to be done within this period.
And how many aircrafts will we be having by 2020 when the Airbuses are also here?
It will be a total of six.
A total of 6.
Yes.
Is that a sufficient number to run a profitable airline business?
In terms of the business plan, it's sufficient indeed for the startup.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Kasim Kaira, for making time for the show. Thank you very much, Irene Kiza Onyango, for making time for the show. Thank you very much to you all our viewers for joining us tonight and always. I can see that debate on Twitter is intense. People are also sharing on WhatsApp and other platforms. Please continue the debate. We'll continue asking the questions, and we need the answers. Susan and Mr. Mulea and the other government officials and the ministers need to keep giving answers to questions that we have. No question is unimportant at this stage, and we'll keep asking those questions. Thank you very much to the production crew that's here played to deliver the show to you, and of course to you all our viewers. From me, it's a good night.